Hi, I'm Dr. Gaby Cora, and welcome to my show, Dr. Gaby's Take, Make Life Interesting. In 1995, I had just been a researcher at the National Institutes of Health for just about 2 weeks when a Hispanic network called us asking for an expert in depression for the National Depression Screening Day. Out of a very large group, I was probably the only one who spoke Spanish at the time. So they assumed that because I spoke Spanish, I was also an expert in the Hispanic culture. That was far from being truth. The first thing, though, that we think about cultures and diversity is if there is another language involved, communication and language are of essence. It's very important for us to be able to communicate, be able to understand, and not just assume that because we speak Spanish, we can communicate exactly the same way from one country to the next. Actually, we know very well that in Spain, there may be some use of words or constructions that may be quite different from the kinds of words that we would use in Colombia, or for example, in Argentina, or even in Cuba. So it's very important for us to be open-minded about what words to use. The fact that we all speak the same language doesn't mean that we are experts within the totality of the Hispanic group. The lessons learned from my experience include the first part, the communication, the language use. Now, it's true, I spoke Spanish. I speak Spanish fluently, particularly Argentine Spanish. However, it's very important to realize that Argentine Spanish can be very different from Spanish from Mexico, which is the one that we most widely use in the United States, and or Spanish as used in Puerto Rico or in Spain. So it's very important for us to realize that there may be some differences in pronunciation or even in the use of words. The second one is that in Spanish we tend to be lively in our conversations. In English we tend to be a little more formal and more serious. Last but not least, in Spanish we tend to have more of a casual conversation. So unless it's a more formal presentation in a professional meeting, we tend to use many words in Spanish to say pretty much the same thing that we would try to say in English, straight to the point. So Spanish use and language is the first point that I want to make around diversity and the Hispanic culture. The second one is cultural awareness. How can we be more open about the different cultures and not just assume that because you speak Spanish or you come from a Spanish-speaking country, everybody is just about the same. One of the stories that comes to mind is when a very dear colleague took me to a restaurant, to a Mexican restaurant, thinking that I was going to feel very comfortable knowing of my Hispanic heritage. Now, interestingly, and little did he know, I had never ever had Mexican food in my life. So to assume that someone who speaks Spanish will also be very used to eating nachos is probably not the right way to go. But being aware and trying our very best in making sure that our guests are comfortable is the first and most important thing. So don't assume, ask questions. If you don't know, just don't assume that someone likes this or that just because you assume that Hispanic cultures would like that. So ask questions and be open to that and just observe. There may be very different groups that prefer different things. So be open to that experience. The third part is many people love to educate themselves more about learning much more about other cultures. And you can do that formally through taking classes not only on the language but also cultural classes or having cultural experiences where you would visit a country or have a total immersion opportunity where you would learn a lot more about other people. So the most important here is to be open to the experience. So thank you so much for joining me and enjoy. This is Season 1, Episode 5, on diversity and the Hispanic culture. Today my guest is Maverick Linda Lane Gonzalez, who's CEO of Viva Partnership. Welcome. So your family is one of the true Maverick families.
Yes, real Maverick. Like, the last name is Maverick. Yes, the Maverick family, and Maverick comes from that, the word Maverick, which means to lead the pack and never follow, et cetera, comes from my great-great-grandfather, Samuel Augustus Maverick, who went from Virginia to Mexico in the 1830s, or 1820s actually, went to Mexico to seek his fortune. And so he had to learn Spanish, he had to learn how to work within that culture. And the reason that we have this word maverick that we use too much probably by now, but is because he bought a bunch of cattle and a bunch of horses. He had no idea how to be a rancher. He was a lawyer by trade. And so Jose Antonio, the guy who worked for him, said, boss, it's time to brand the cows and the horses. And he said, oh my gosh, it's barbaric. We can't do that. So he decided to let them roam free. And so every time anybody would see a horse or a cow or a bull without a brand, they would say, oh, it's a maverick. So that's the way that Maverick came into play. But Mexico is always, for us, been very, very special, regardless of coming originally from the United States. And my grandmother and her grandmother spent a lot of time in Mexico, and from Saltillo, Guanajuato, all the way up through San Antonio. So we're Mexican-American, or American-Mexicans, I guess you could say.
So you were raised in this interesting integrated mix.
Oh, absolutely.
Of going back and forth with both cultures.
And back and forth with language, and back and forth with food. When we get together as a family, we eat tamales, and arroz y frijoles, and enchiladas, and all of that. So we're very much a mixture. I have cousins Carmelita, and I have cousins Howard. It's quite an interesting mix.
So a true Hispanic Maverick.
Yes, a true Hispanic Maverick. And then I grew up living in Mexico, in Guanajuato. And I lived there from the time that I was 12 until I graduated from high school, at which point I went on and I lived in Brazil. I went to school in Brazil, so I had to add another language there and another culture as well.
So quite a bit of background, mixed background, that gives you all this diversity in working in this area that you so have loved for 25 years.
Because I grew up being open to culture, because I was exposed to so many cultures when I was young. And so when you're open and aware and not afraid, it makes it so much easier to see the world from a different perspective and a broader vision. And I think that the marketing and the advertising and why I went into that, people will say, then how did you get from here to here? Was that I worked for a couple of different companies that that really wanted just to speak or communicate with people as if they were all the same. And it was very frustrating when they would talk about Hispanic or even Latin America. Hispanic and Latin America as being the same. It's completely different. The experiences are different. The culture at the center is much the same. So I wanted to help them understand that consumer better, so that they could find some sort of relationship with them and then create a bond.